Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you for inviting me back to the newly founded OCS Stockholm. It's really a pleasure to see many of you again, and we've known each other for several years now. Am I speaking loud enough?
Yes. Yes.
I don't know, we don't want to fiddle with the microphone. I'll try to speak up. I was asked to be a little bit briefer than usually because you have a lot on your agenda today, so I'll start straight away. I was a little bit proud of myself to come up with this nice title, which is sort of tongue-in-cheek in English, Framed Chinese Porcelain in European Painting. Yes, because in English the word framed has a double meaning. One is to frame a picture and one is to frame somebody for a bad deed. Okay, so let's take a brief look at this school poster that was ordered in the 1940s from a painter and industrial designer called Carl Erik Olof Hagdahl, short for, I think it was Osse he's called, something like that. So he was asked by the authorities to produce paintings that were then later printed as school posters. And one of them, you perhaps remember that when I was a kid at school, we certainly did have these things. You see at the top this thing, you can hang it up in front of the classroom, and then the children can look at the picture. It's not as clear as it is on my screen, but okay.
We do our best.
Yeah. Yeah, so we still had like history classes which involved pictures like that. That was the pre-digital age. So in this picture, which was used in history classes in Swedish schools in the 1940s all the way, I think, through the 1970s, you see an example of the Östindiska kompaniet as the painter Hagdahl imagined it. So it's very naive perhaps, but it puts a period in Swedish history to the forefront in a Swedish school setting to teach the children of Sweden about, well, the glorious past, which included, of course, the international trade through the Östindiska kompaniet, bringing things from China to Europe, more specifically to Sweden, and taking other goods from Sweden to the Far East. So in the picture, sorry, it's a bit blurred on the screen, it's much clearer in the computer. You see ships like the Indiaman in Göteborg, you know this replica, and the merchant, here's the Chinese mandarin. Of course, nobody like that, of that government level, would ever come to meet those foreign merchants. They were not even allowed to go beyond the city of Canton when they came to China. So this is completely illusionary. But here, look at the goods that they are trading. Here is a nice little lacquer cabinet for writing, some silk, and what interests us most today are those three actually, porcelain objects. This one here is a European traditional soup terrine with, it's not very clearly visible, but let me tell you, and please believe me, this is the image of a, what do you call that, wapen? Armory?
Coat of arms.
Coat of arms, that's the word. A coat of arms of some Swedish noble family, and a plate, and here an original Chinese blue and white bowl. And that's the focus of our interest now. Yeah. So this jar in the painting, in this school poster, looks very much like this sample jar here on the left from the Gustav Wallenberg collection, which was sold in the Bukowski's spring sale in 2022. And the motif is clearly recognizable as lotus motif, lotus pattern. You see the flower as such, and the tendrils. That is very typical of this lotus pattern. So in other words, there had to be a direct connection between the image that the painter did and a real object of that kind. He must have seen something like that with his own eyes, somewhere in a Swedish collection. It's not possible otherwise that perhaps through another painting, but it's unlikely. So at this stage in the 1940s, when the painter did this school poster, he had clear knowledge of an object like this lotus jar and translated this into painting, which was used in schools to teach children about the history of Sweden. Again, a rather clear example of this Chinese blue and white porcelain lotus jar, which is definitely dated to the Wanli period. I'm a bit suspicious about this, but bear with me, you all know I'm not a porcelain specialist. This was sold at Leland Little Auction House in North Carolina, and I think the price is a little bit low for this to be genuine. I have doubts. It sold for only $4,000 US last year. Anyway, it's just to show the direct correlation between a real existing object and its reinterpretation or translation into another medium, namely painting. So you've already mentioned this, and everybody who has read the simple Wikipedia entry on Chinese painting and porcelain will come across this. It's very dark on the screen. On this painting by Giovanni Bellini, Il Festino degli Dei, which is a dated painting by this Venetian painter of 1514, so quite early. The real painting is now in America in the National Gallery of Art. And this is said to be the oldest depiction of Chinese porcelain in Europe. And again, from the details, which I'll show you in a moment, we have to understand that Bellini must have seen a genuine, real Chinese blue and white bowl. Sorry for the quality of this. It's much nicer here. I'll show you detail in a moment. Here, here, and down here. So I'll show you the details here. Again, on your right-hand side, you see this lotus motif that you're already familiar with. Oh, thank you, much better. So, and I mean, he lived and worked mainly in Venice with the Doge, and the Doge had diplomatic gifts that they received from all over the world, and he was very closely, the painter was closely involved with the court and the nobility, and it must have been that he had access to actually see with his own eyes a bowl like this. It's impossible that he made something up like that. So, and here's the third bowl in the picture at the bottom right, filled with fruit. Again, it's the lotus motif. So starting in 1514 with Bellini, in painting, this is the earliest known instant of a Ming Dynasty blue and white lotus bowl in European painting. So you will all know this. The East India companies imported porcelain from China and Japan, of course, to Europe, beginning in the 17th century. The Svenska Östindiska Kompaniet was founded rather late in 1731 and in Göteborg, and it was a time when there was the so-called like porcelain fever broke out everywhere on every levels all through Europe. It was quite the rage, and the English poet John Gay, who was actually a friend of the composer Handel, and they stayed in the same house in Burlington House in London at the same time, and Gay actually wrote some libretti for Handel's operas, at least 3, and one for the original, what is it, Peebush, the Beggar's Opera. The text is also from John Gay. and he wrote a satirical poem of the title "To a Lady on Her Passion for Old China." This is a rather long poem, but the interesting and fun section reads, "China's the passion of her soul. A cup, a plate, a dish, a bowl can kindle wishes in her breast, inflame with joy, or break her rest." This little copper print of John Gay is actually in the Händel House in Leipzig. So there is quite a connection between all these intellectuals and artists of the time. And they were all, be it a composer, a poet, a painter, fully aware of this porcelain fever in the 17th and 18th century. So sure enough, European painters very soon picked up on this craze for China, as in Chinese porcelain. One of them, a very gifted painter, was the Dutch painter Willem Kaaf. On the screen you see his still life with a Chinese bowl, Nautilus cup and other objects. It is dated 1662, so more than 100 years before the Swedish East Indiska Company was founded. But the Dutch East India Company already existed. So they had already imported blue and white and other ceramic objects from China into the Netherlands, and through the Amsterdam market, things were sold all over Europe. This painting is now in Madrid, and take a look at this so-called sugar bowl. There's a silver spoon in here, but it can't possibly have served that purpose because refined sugar wasn't even invented yet in the year 1662. So this is a historical anachronism. So but what are we actually looking at here? As I said, it's a so-called sugar bowl, and the motif applied, the pair of figures, they represent the 8 immortals of Taoism, like these 2 figures here, and there are more around the bowl. There is a comparable bowl of this type that looks actually very similar, and to this day is still in the Netherlands, in Amsterdam, which is a bowl with landscapes and, again, the 8 immortals, which is datable to the early 17th century and is probably Ming or transitional. It's quite a small object, as you can see from the measurements, and it's now kept at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam. So it's very likely that there was a connection between the painter and an object like this. So one just wonders, what could that connection have been? So we know from historical records, the Dutch were very good at writing down things like the Swedish. That's very helpful for researchers. That Wilhelm Kaaf, the painter, stayed at the home of a man named Johannes Sletor in 1653. Now this Sletor, he was a jeweler, merchant, and most importantly, director of the Dutch West India Company in Amsterdam. And as a private collector and merchant, he owned many fine pieces of Chinese porcelain. So as the painter stayed at his house in that year, it is very likely that he had seen a real object like this, which he painted, so to speak, from real life. So a direct connection between a real object and a painting, and the painting was viewed by many people and is now in a museum. So through the medium of painting, something that is singular. The object is a singular object, but a painting can travel and can be seen in museums or collections anywhere. And it spreads, it can be reproduced as prints, etches or whatever. So the knowledge about porcelain spread not necessarily only through the objects, but also through paintings and prints, etc. Another fine example that I simply couldn't resist to show to you today is a painting by the French artist Jacques Linard, The 5 Senses and the 4 Elements, now in the Louvre Museum, also dated early 17th century, 1627. Now please note that here is the bowl in question, and here I enlarged it for you. You see there's a painted section like with a houseboat and a lake and a mountain and some kind of tree. And next to it there is some writing. Sorry if I move over so I can show you. Some of the characters are actually legible, real Chinese characters, but some others are completely fictitious and made up. This is a very curious mix. So, but I assume because he was a French painter with a good eye, but no knowledge of Chinese writing, he did his best to copy what he saw, but because he's trained as a Frenchman, I mean, reading Latin letters, okay? So some characters that to him looked something like a Latin letter, he simply wrote the Latin letter instead of the Chinese character. Like here, this looks like the Latin letter R, okay? I think he simply misunderstood some Chinese character. I can't figure out what it was. Or this simple hook doesn't exist in Chinese writing. It's just a hook. But there are other characters that like this year, which is legible, xia, and shi. So there are some genuine Chinese characters in there that he correctly copied. So this is quite a special painting, showing the abilities what a European artist can do even with something as challenging on porcelain, that is, with Chinese writing. That is very impressive, I think. So, but luckily for us, this wonderful Dutch tradition of painting still lives, including Chinese porcelains, is still alive today, like in the work of Jan Frederik Johannes Nachtegaal. Like here on the screen, you see still life with old cheese and Chinese porcelain and gingerbread. Not a very classical topic, dated 1987. And it is helpful to know that Nachtegaal worked as a restorer or restorator at Amsterdam's Rijksmuseum, where you just saw that little sugar bowl. And there, of course, due to his work, he had first-hand experience with the Chinese ceramics collection at the Rijksmuseum. So this would be a typical example of an original Chinese blue and white decorated mug, beer mug, but later when it arrived in Europe, they added the silver or lead parts to connect the lid with the beer mug. So that's not an original Chinese design. The illustration is, and the same holds true about this bowl. So let's come back to Sweden. We've been straying abroad long enough. And look at this gentleman on the left. Sorry, I'm standing in front of this. Is it Klaas or Klaes to pronounce his name? Klaas? Thank you. So Klaas Grill. He was the director of the Grill trading house, and through that, of course, he had very close ties with the East India trade through the Swedish East India Company. Klaas Grill actually had a house where he and his family lived that I'm sure all of you know, and I hope most of you have visited at some point, which is Svindesvik in Nacka. And actually in 1784, that is just after Grill had passed away, a painter named Carl Petter Hilleström did this painting. And funnily enough, I mean, here in Sweden, things are spread out in various museums and collections, but they interrelate. Like, for example, a painting like this and like this should be put in a way, or could be, it's an idea, could be put together with the actual porcelain objects that are so famous for this family. I'll come to that in a moment. I think the renovation of Svindesvik has been completed. When I drove past there with a boat the other day, the scaffolding was down. So maybe you can make an appointment and go and visit this place. It's very nice. So the grill family, in general, it became fashionable among the Swedish nobility and wealthy families to order sets of table services with their coat of arms, thank you, on it from Jingdezhen in China and have it delivered through the East India Company. And the grill coat of arms consists of a stork with a cricket in its beak. Here is the stork, and you can't really see it very well with a cricket in his bead. This black and white image comes from an essay in the Nordiska Museet's annual yearbook from, I think, 1953 or something like that. There was a whole article dedicated only to the Grill family coat of arms on porcelain. So it's strange places that you have to look for information. So this is a better picture where you can see the Grill family coat of arms. Again, this object is not at Östasiatiska Museet, where I would expect such a wonderful, historically important piece of porcelain made in China to be. But no, it's at Nordiska Museet. And here again is the stork with the cricket in its beak. Here again a tureen with the same Grill family coat of arms. So first, of course, there was a hand-done drawing on paper. That was sent with the ships to China, to Jingdezhen, where a Chinese artisan had to try and make sense of this, for him, utterly foreign, strange, exotic, unintelligible image. And so sometimes mistakes occurred because the Chinese artist couldn't quite understand what this all was about. The same about the French painter who didn't copy the Chinese characters perfectly because he simply didn't know what all this is about. So, most of the members of the larger Grill family had complete sets, table service with their coat of arms on it, including the family branch founded by Louisa Ulrika and Jean Abraham Grill. He actually was one of the first directors of the Swedish East India Company. These two portraits of these nice people are nowadays in the Göteborg's Stadsmuseum, and they're all signed and dated and everything. You might wonder a bit about the lady's hairstyle. It's not that she went to a poor hairdresser, but I think she's wearing a peruke, just like her husband. It's not his own hair. That was the fashion in those days, even for ladies, not only gentlemen. So, and they bought a place called Gårdegård in Östergötland. Has anybody of you ever visited this place? You have?
Yep.
Good. Just one? Two?
I have.
Three? Yes. Because I was going to suggest that you as a group might organize some, group tour or something, pre-arranged visit to a place like this. As I said, I mean, things are so spread out in this rich country. So Jean Abraham Grill and Louisa Ulrika moved to this place, or they bought it in 1775 after they got married. Of course, they had, for special occasions, a service set with their family coat of arms, but for everyday use in this rather rustic countryside setting, they preferred to use less refined everyday porcelain. So they ordered a service from China, again through the East India Company, for everyday use, and this one had the pagoda pattern on it, not with their coat of arms. You may not know that my partner and I, we do collect egg cups of strange shapes and interesting decors. This one here has the pagoda pattern on it. I bought it here in Stockholm last Easter. It was easy because Easter there were lots of egg cups around in some antique shop. So it's not a high quality thing, it's not hand painted, if I'm correct, because at the foot you can see that they just glued on the pattern and it doesn't overlap properly, and then glazed it, and it has some illegible writing at the bottom. So just if you want to take a look at this and shift around, and here is a postcard of the first image I showed. So just circulate it amongst you. And here on the screen at the lower left hand side you can see a tureen with this pagoda pattern that the Grill family used in Gårdegård for everyday purposes. Another object that they used in this place was this little salt pincher, blue underglaze, with this pagoda pattern, also made in China. And this one is now, along with a lot of the Grill family porcelain of all kinds, both with their coat of arms and with this pagoda pattern at Nordiska Museet. So if you want to look at Chinese porcelain from Swedish collections, it's not only, of course, Östasiatiska Museet, but also Nordiska Museet, where I think things like this are displayed in like a section called something like Everyday Life in 18th Century Countryside Sweden or something like that. So it's not a context where you expect to find an excellent high quality object like this. So let's come back to Gårdegård. They actually have, like these three ladies said, they actually, in one of their barns, they built up a porcelain museum called Svensk Porslinmuseum. It's not that far, it's just a little bit near Motala. And I must confess I haven't been, just online spying on them. But I thought from what I get from the pictures, that looks like a place one should visit if you have an interest in the history of Chinese porcelain in Sweden. So again, here's this tureen. And perhaps most of you mentioned reading books on ceramics. Charlotte and Clive Hornstrand published a book in 2013, The Family Grill East Indian Porcelain, which is a very good and very dense collection of very rich material. And as you probably knew them, you might...
You were in the board also, Östasiatiska.
Yeah, and Charlotte is a born... Yeah, but she is a born family ne Grill.
Yes, exactly.
That's the connection.
She is Grill. She
Yeah.
was.
Yeah, yeah. And Clive actually signed the book for me. So let's come back to this pagoda pattern and other ideas. This import through the Östindiska Kompaniet of Chinese porcelain soon inspired Swedish artists to experiment with these new and exotic designs. Here on the screen, a blue and white octagonal dish, a rather bland name for it, done by the artist Jonas Åberg in Rörstrand in 1757. So just like a bit more than 20 years after the Swedish East India Company was founded. And this plate here is in the Röhsska Museum in Göteborg, and we've had many sessions there, and you're all familiar with this museum. I'll come back to that plate in a moment. So that's what the Swedish artists perceived to be typically Chinese. Like you have those two trees, you have a little bridge, you have a little hut-like structure, a little temple in the far back, a boat, and another pagoda-like structure. So, and another place to turn to. Have you ever been? Anybody here to?
Ja, men Östasiatiska Museets vänförening.
Ja, vi var där.
Ja, precis.
Vi ordnade en resa.
Oh, Vännerföreningen, you had a trip there?
Yeah, we had a trip there, yes.
Excellent. So you'll know much better than I do. So Tureholm Castle near Trosa, so that's not far away. was well, mainly restored. It already existed by Count Ture Gabriel Bielke, and the interior of this place is done in the so-called chinoiserie manner. And this place, as we see it now, was rebuilt after a fire in the 1720s. The architect of this place is Carl Horlemann. He's the very one who also built the Svindesvik Manor in Nacka for the Grill family. So you see, it's a very tight connection. East India Company, porcelain, coat of arms, painters, intellectuals, close cooperation. So I'll take you inside the castle to one specific room, the so-called parade room. I'll show you another image in a short while, done with Chinese-style wall paintings. Some are very odd. It's basically this dark thing where you can't see anything. And this one here where some official is carried in a sedan chair, and this thing in the background, which is meant to be something like a pagoda, but it looks more like a Swedish church. Anyway, it was their idea of what China looks like. Whoops. Yeah, sorry, it's very hard to see, but these tapestry also include painted porcelain, like these 3 vases, and they also have actual Chinese porcelain in their collection, sometimes displayed on the tables. But the central point of that place is not those wallpapers or the few little objects that they still have, I think, in that castle, but it's the so-called Chinese kitchen at Tureholm, which was painted by an otherwise relatively unknown painter of the name Carl Friedrich Engel Krona in the years 1744 to 1746, with motifs taken directly from porcelain. So do some of these motifs like this pagoda, this sort of banana plant-like plant, tree, mountains in the background. Again, this pagoda-shaped kind of structure, a bird, but of course there will be a second one. 2 Chinese gentlemen talking to each other. Does that remind you of something? Perhaps the pagoda pattern that I just showed before, some more details from the same kitchen. Here 2 Oriental looking gentlemen talking with each other, Chinese man, and here you see it's actually not only 2 birds, but he's quite overdone it and painted like 4. In the original story it's only 2 birds. So now we come to that pattern that I was sort of aiming at, the so-called willow pattern or pagoda pattern. This one really has set characteristics. It features a pagoda structure, 3 figures on a bridge, a figure on a boat, 2 flying birds, and a weeping willow tree, hence its name in English, the willow pattern. The motif is based on a probably fictitious tragic love story whereby the lovers, who in the end can't really escape the pressures from the father, etc., I think they commit suicide and turn into 2 birds that's the 2 birds here, and that's also on the egg cup that is circulating. You'll recognize all the patterns on this little egg cup. Yeah, that's it. That's my egg cup on the mantelpiece in my little stuga here in Sweden, with the others that I bought last Easter. Sorry, this is not high quality porcelain. This is just for vardagsbruk. Yes. So just to show it again as an image, the details, but the actual motif is not from China at all. It originated from an Englishman named Thomas Minton, and he did this design for a man called Thomas Turner for his Cawley factory in Shropshire around 1780. So again, it ties in with all these East India companies. Minton then moved to this boat factory in Staffordshire in 1784, and that is when they started using this design. This design, mass-produced for the people and affordable, became an instant hit. It was really, really popular and much appreciated, of course, in England, in Great Britain, but also in the United States of America. And to this day, you can find cheap, reproduced plates and dinner services of this time, especially in the US, for next to nothing. But they look nice and they remind people of their childhood, or maybe a good time they spent at their grandparents' house, eating from those very plates. So now we'll come back again for a brief moment to Röhsska Museum in Göteborg, specifically to the East Asian Inspiration Room number 3. In the center middle shelf, there is this blue and white octagonal dish by Jonas Åberg from 1757, which I had shown you earlier. So it's still around, it exists, you can go and look at it in Göteborg. But what I'm trying to come to the contemporary Sweden, England in that case now, are those 3 plates at the top shelf. They are the creation of a ceramic artist who does, I think, fascinating and in a literal sense mind-spinning work. These 3 plates are 3 of a set of actually 6, and they're called spin, as you move a potter's wheel to throw a piece of ceramics. Each plate has a diameter of 27 centimeters, so it's not very big. He created those images digitally on his computer and then had it printed on bone china. Very often it would be famous companies like Wedgwood, etc., who would then do the actual work. So now let's take a closer look. You again recognize the willow pattern, but on his computer he started to manipulate the image, started to set the potter's wheel in motion slowly, and then eventually this looks like a washing machine stage 3 or something like that, and then finally it's just a blue and white spin or swirl as a result. But this is, I mean, intellectually too, it's very nice and thought-provoking to think about the actual process of working with a potter's wheel, of making a real porcelain object and playing with the imagery on it. So, and contemporary art, so everything sort of falls into place. And as I said, I really like his work. I mean, just look at that. I think every time I look at that, I need to adjust my glasses. Am I seeing right here? So this one is called In Perspective Willow 1. Very matter-of-fact title. It's Anglaise screen-painted transfer on bone china, again made by Royal Dalton, or perhaps Wedgwood, designed and decorated by Robert Dawson. I mean, that's a name I think you should watch out for in the future. This object here, this In Perspective Willow 1, is at the Victorian Albert Museum in London. Really playing with perspective very much, and again it's the now famous and familiar with the 2 birds, the willow leaf pattern. So I was asked to be as brief as I can possibly be before you will be sitting down for dinner later. Let me thank you for listening to my talk, and I meant that sort of quite literally. This motif, you'll find it nowadays everywhere, like on this cover of this modern designed chair or another plate by Dalton. Thank you very much for your attention.